Very pleased to introduce Jeff Breinholt, who apparently is going to talk about terrorism, rock and roll. And I've been friends with Jeff and known him for a very long time. And Jeff's wife, Moni, and I were colleagues for quite a while. At the International Monetary Fund, we worked on money laundering and terrorism financing. You have Jeff's biography actually with you. I don't think it mentions that he was on the Yale varsity football team when he was at Yale, and his combative nature that he used to bring to the gridiron against Harvard and other nasty folks. He's brought against terrorists, against tax cheats, actually before that, and I'm very happy to introduce him now.
I was just a panelist this morning, but now I've moved up, so I'm sorry that I probably won't be able to compete with Rick McDonald, but I never turned down an opportunity to speak to a larger group. And I must say I was inspired last night because we went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame where I've never been, and we had an opportunity to see a little bit of it. I was really impressed by how much stuff they have there, but one of the things that really struck me, there's a wall, and it has pictures of people who have described rock and roll as the greatest threat to civilization. And there's people like Tipper Gore, and there's people like Ernest Hollings, and there's people I think like Anita Bryant, and this was not too long ago. I was very impressed by the fact that rock and roll was coined, the term rock and roll was coined in Cleveland by a radio disc jockey, 1952. So even though Cleveland has never had a rock and roll scene as Minneapolis or New York or places that are known for that, it does have a claim to this history by virtue of having coined the term. Rock and roll is American art. We proudly invented it. As we talk about terrorist financing, I want to talk about artistic expression. You doubt there's a clash of cultures? I would submit we are beyond talking about root causes. I say it's time to declare an impasse, assign sides, and let the games begin. I'm saying this, don't mistake me for what I'm saying as militancy. I am not referring to what my friends across the river in the Pentagon refer to as kinetic remedies. After all, I am a lawyer, and as such, I'm going to go into my regular mode of giving you advice as the client based on recent developments. Here's my legal advice. It's time to get ready for trial, during which we'll use every tool at our disposal. Settlement discussions, alas, appear to be over. Our lot is cast. It's time for a full court press. There's really one big issue, and it's who is more humanistic, us or them. How do we deal with this disparity? I don't think I need to describe what the importance is. The winner gets to survive as we are currently living, and the loser does not. You have adequate fees, isn't that right? I hope so. On March 20th, 2008, near the 20th year anniversary of the fatwa, the famous fatwa issued against artist Salman Rushdie, we were approaching that time, and at the time you were hearing complaints that really dealt with his ability and our ability to read and think about what we want. Today we are dealing with a very similar type of problem in terms of the decision by some Danish newspaper editors to publish some cartoons that were derogatory about Islam. This controversy is really an experiment to test the limits of open discourse and has resulted in over 100 people dead throughout the world, and it serves to remind us about the disparity in the world today. Still not convinced? Are you inclined to worry about the legitimacy of their complaints, the complaints of Muslims toward the West, and struggle with such questions as why do they hate us? The answer is obvious. Al-Qaeda hates everyone that is not like them. It's not limited to us. They hate the controlling family in Saudi Arabia. They hate the government in Egypt. They hate us because we love life. They hate us because they never learned the utility of dancing and singing. Laughter is one of the best things we do. In our parlance, they hate us because they are not multiculturalists. They are not art lovers, whereas we are. They hate us because of rock and roll. You see, in the West, we dance and sing. We also laugh. We laugh at ourselves. We laugh at our rivals. We laugh at our leaders. We definitely laugh at ourselves. Laughter is good. It makes us live longer. Nothing is sacred when it comes to civil discourse, and that includes newspaper cartoons or Saturday Night Live. As people, we make an earnest attempt to be pious. Of course, it rarely works. Life and laughter too often get in the way. People picketing movies like The Last Temptation of Christ, or I remember The Life of Brian. On those rare nights as married couples, we venture out to see a movie. Sometimes we have to cross picket lines. We laugh at them. Fortunately, we didn't have to cross picket lines last night when we went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I would have defiantly crossed that picket line. Why should we not laugh? They are worthy of our ridicule. They laugh at themselves, the picketers do. In the end, they laugh at themselves as well. Inevitably, after the movie, we're in a cafe and we're laughing about the movie, and they come in sheepishly and we say, "Hey, how are you doing?" And they come over and they have a great laugh. They tell us how hard it is to work for their fundamentalist paymasters. How funny. How funny. Grab a chair. We'll all have a laugh. We don't make them watch the movie. They might find distasteful, just as they don't force us to join the picket lines. We know life is too short for that. This is apparently too much for Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri, and it makes them absolutely outraged. There are, of course, people here who claim that terrorism is a product of Western transgressions, that if we did not oppress the Arab world by occupying Saudi Arabia, Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden would have no complaint with us. Why do we have American troops in Saudi Arabia? It was because in the summer of 1990, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in an attempt to monopolize the worldwide oil industry, including natural reserves controlled by our friends in Riyadh. Okay, boys will be boys. This is the Middle East after all. Put that whole nasty business aside. We fought that battle. Let's not revisit it. But then there's this other small thing. Al-Qaeda attacked the World Trade Center and the Pentagon on 9/11. That was a full 11 years after we installed troops in Saudi Arabia. And it was 6 years before that that Hezbollah, a Shiite militant organization, destroyed our embassy in Beirut. Now, what did we do to deserve that? Western imperialism? We never invaded the Arab world before that. They invited us there. The U.S. has never had imperial aspirations. Colonies? Think about it. The Philippines? Puerto Rico? Tonga? Samoa? Panama Canal Zone? St. Croix? We lack the patience for colonies. We are too busy keeping the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals happy. So now it turns out that Al-Qaeda's big complaint with us is that we accept people who try to make us laugh rather than condemning them as they think we should. Well, guess what? Al-Qaeda's in good company. There are Western people, prominent Western people, who expressed outrage at the Danish cartoons. They say we owe the Muslim world an apology for having offended them. Last Friday, the UN Human Rights Council took a direct swipe at freedom of expression. In a 32-0 vote, the Council instructed its expert on freedom of expression to report the Council on all instances in which individuals abuse their freedom of speech by giving expression to racial or religious bias. The measure was proposed by those paragons of enlightenment, Egypt and Pakistan. It was supported by all the Arab, Muslim, and African countries, all fonts of liberty. European states abstained. The U.S. is not on the Council. We reportedly worked behind the scenes to try to derail that resolution. However, one prominent U.S. Muslim organization has condemned Saudi Arabia for not embracing that resolution. This is the problem for those of us who fancy ourselves champion of soft power tools. Without these tools, military actions become more attractive. We have a harder time keeping the more militant masters of our most hardcore tools at bay when we lack the political will and the inability or refusal to use so-called soft power tools. Imagine how much harder it would have been for those people who opposed our 2003 invasion of Iraq if we did not have economic sanctions in place. Economic sanctions, which were considered the alternative to the invasion. Imagine if we didn't have economic sanctions, how tough it would have been for them to argue that. If we are deprived of even the softest of all of our soft power tools, art, what is the alternative? Well, I have some bad news for Osama bin Laden. He's not going to like it, but it's a little secret for him. We might laugh easily but do not mistake that for lack of will. When the gloves come off, very much like our British forefathers, we can be very serious about when we choose to be. We do not countenance bullies. Americans take and Westerners take the right to laugh very seriously, and we are willing to die for that. It's not something with which another culture should eagerly trifle. Hitler thought laughter made us pushovers, and Stalin and his cast of successors thought they could make the world so serious that laughter would not be tolerated. In their view, the West was decadent, and they would bury us. Don't assume that because we like to laugh, we do not have strong feelings. And that just because we permit such things as rock and roll within our boundaries, we are not people who mess around with the right to artistic expression are not fought by us in the end, by all means. Now, this is just something I created. Okay, this is an example of the continuum of soft power. Looking at it later, you'll see that the most militant ones are on the right wing, and the softest ones on the left wing. I can tell you that's inadvertent. It's the way it worked out. But this is basically a how-to manual on how to combat international mischief, generally. Okay, it doesn't matter what type of mischief you're talking about. This is a how-to manual because you choose one of the remedies on the far left, and you use it until you exhaust it. And if it doesn't work, you move to the right. This could apply to the U.S. unilateral power, or it could apply to the multilateral system. Now, don't mistake what these things are. These are all exhibits of power. Power meaning we're trying to compel some person or some group or some country to do or abstain from doing an act. So we are trying to get them to do something that they are not otherwise inclined to do. It's power. Okay, even if it's soft, it's power. Okay, where would art fit in this? Art, I would argue, is even more to the left of diplomacy. What happens when art is off the table? What are we left with? If even artistic expression, the softest of all soft power. Okay? There are books about the U.S. efforts in terrorist financing that are published by reputable publishers. This is one that just came out recently. Okay, there's another one written by R.T. Naylor in Canada. And if you read these books without being sufficiently apprised of the real facts, you would believe that we are losing this effort. We are losing this battle. This is Ibrahim Warda. Terrorist financing is about clean money not being soiled, yet for bureaucratic and political reasons, money laundering and terrorist financing have since 9/11 become interchangeable. Oh no. The amounts needed to fund terrorist operations are small, and such amounts can easily bypass the formal banking system. Furthermore, terrorist financing is in many ways the opposite of money laundering. It is about cleaning dirty money, but about soiling clean money. This is his aha moment. Okay, terrorist financing is different from money laundering. Therefore, it's futile for us to go after it. It requires less in the way of means, less dollar amounts. It's not motivated by greed. Okay, this is a big aha moment for him. Okay, I love this. I love this. The reason I have Richard Nixon here is because I'm a Watergate aficionado. It's one of my hobbies. I study Watergate, and this thing was the Elliot Spitzer developments from a terrorist financing perspective were just too good to be true. Okay, the reason I would argue that Elliot Spitzer was turned in a suspicious activity report was because he had some very compliant bankers, and they understood that under the FATF rules and all the compliance training they do, they realize that there's a special risk factor when you're dealing with politically exposed persons, PEPs, right? It was designed to get after people who are Latin American dictators, Fujimori or Pinochet, and it was supposed to get us to really monitor them because they might be looting their country's coffers. Okay, it wasn't meant for Elliot Spitzer. Okay, it didn't matter. He was a politically exposed person. Chances are they looked at this thing more carefully. He wasn't involved in terrorist financing. He wasn't involved in drug trafficking. He was involved in nookie, right? He gets caught nonetheless. This is Richard Nixon's greatest revenge. I believe the reason that Watergate occurred was because Richard Nixon hated Ted Kennedy. He's on the tape saying, get dirt on that Kennedy character. He didn't like Ted Kennedy. He didn't like Bobby Kennedy. He didn't like John F. Kennedy. He didn't like Joseph Kennedy. Okay, he remembered Joseph Kennedy. He said, oh, Joe Kennedy, he was quite the ladies' man. Quite the ladies' man. He just was upset because he played by the rules, he thought. And these Kennedys, they all get what they want. And so he's on tape saying this. This is what gave rise to Watergate. Elliot Spitzer gets taken down based on Nookie. Okay? Other erroneous analysis. Some of these books. A government cannot punish someone for what they do with their money. Really? Huh. Tell that to Martha Stewart. Okay? Crimes motivated by religion cannot be prosecuted. Huh? We got Sheikh Rahman, the blind sheikh. He claimed that it was a First Amendment right of his to order his adherents to go out and wage urban warfare in New York City. He made a First Amendment argument. Judge Michael Mukasey said, nice try, motion denied. Okay? Big one. It's unfair to prosecute someone for less than the full extent of what you know about their conduct. I love this one. This is Al Capone, right? It's not fair. I've read academic literature saying it. Here's why it's not fair. It throws off the political economy of the criminal justice system, because the criminal justice system ceases being something we can use to signal to us, members of the public, who the bad guys are. If you go out and get Al Capone or a terrorist financer for tax violations, it's not fair, but you should be compelled to disclose everything you know about that person. This argument is made. It's never made in a way that's been legally cognizable in the U.S. Then I love this one. Matrices show that the war on terrorist financing is bad policy. Okay, I put up Dennis Lormel, my friend Dennis Lormel here, partly because it's fun, but also because Dennis he was the former head of the terrorist financing operations section, the very first unit put together at the FBI. He's since retired, and he's willing to say things publicly. Dennis says, yeah, financial mechanisms allowed us to prevent 6 acts of terrorism in the United States. People who argue about our metrics say, well, you haven't eliminated terrorism, so therefore it's wrong. Therefore, this policy is just costing banks and others way too much, but you haven't eliminated terrorism. That's not the empirical standard. The empirical standard is whether, but for your soft power remedies, terrorism has been decreased. Terrorist acts that would occur but for your actions have not occurred. That's what I would argue empirically. Okay? Of course, that's very tricky. We'll never know, but that's the standard. So the only way to judge it empirically, if that is the standard, is to know for certainty how many terrorist acts. Dennis is the only person who said this publicly. We've prevented 6 terrorist attacks. It's similar to what Director Mueller has said publicly about the number of terrorist plots we've thwarted. Okay, this is another criticism. When you rely on lists, you drive them underground. So what? My response is, so what? Is this not where we want them? When people are underground, they have to lie and cheat and steal. And we love that because we're prosecutors, right? Juries love it. Okay? Key point. When you lie and cheat and steal, sometimes you lie to the wrong people, right? Sometimes the lie becomes more significant than the facts giving rise to the investigation in which you lied. Okay? Bank Secrecy Act. Okay, anybody wonder whether the Bank Secrecy Act is known to our enemies? Okay, here's a little secret. Zacharias Moussaoui comes into Chicago O'Hare. 3 days later, he deposits $30,000 in cash in a newly established bank account in Norman, Oklahoma. He gets taken in immigration custody because his flight instructor says, before 9/11, this guy is really weird. He's doing some very strange things. He doesn't want to learn how to land a plane. He just wants to learn how to, fly it. So immigration comes, take him away. 9/11 hits. Zacharias Moussaoui, we start hearing about. He's in immigration custody. Uh-oh. Immigration custody is not real stable. Our bosses at the time, Michael Chertoff, says, get him out of immigration custody. Find a crime and tag him with it. We go, yes, sir, we'll find a crime. This is what we found. Okay? What does this tell you? What does this suggest to you circumstantially? Comes in the country, enters through O'Hare, 3 days later deposits $30,000 into a newly established bank account. We're thinking, oh, this is great. Bulk cash smuggling, right? He obviously didn't report this. He's working for Al-Qaeda. So we're all excited. We're typing this up, and Mr. Chertoff's going to like us. He's going to like us. And we get a phone call from FinCEN after we're into our 3rd revision. They say, guess what? What? We're busy. Well, guess what? What? You remember that Zacharias Moussaoui guy? Guess what? He filed a CMIR when he came into the United States through O'Hare. What? What does that tell you? It means Al-Qaeda knows our Bank Secrecy Act. It means they're telling their adherents, their recruits, what they have to do to fly under the radar screen. Bankers tell us this is too hard. Al-Qaeda knows it. Okay, they know this is their tradecraft. They don't want to violate the Bank Secrecy Act. We would have had him on a lay-down bulk cash smuggling. We ended up having to throw the whole 9/11 thing against him. This came out in his trial. All right? So this is an instruction manual. All right? We are the champions of soft power. When I say we, I mean lawyers. My job is to promote the role of my job these days. I should say, by the way, I'm normally employed by the Department of Justice. I'm on a sabbatical. Nothing I say is a position of the Department of Justice. This is in my private think tank scholar hat. This is what lawyers do. We are the champions of soft power. I don't think that the answer is that very few people think we should end it. I think there's a lot of them. It's not an amend it, don't end it attitude out there, at least from what I see. There are a lot of people who are outraged. It's ironic that the people who are most militant against U.S. military are often the most aggressive critics of soft power tools. I say to these people, be careful what you wish for. Be careful what you wish for, because if you succeed in taking away these soft power tools, we're not going to have them anymore. This will cease being a continuum. This is going to be just basically a bipolar binary choice between diplomacy and military action. Diplomacy, by the way, not backed up by anything else. Okay, either military action or diplomacy. So you got to be careful about what you wish for if you want to start saying that we should never use these soft power tools. Okay, by the way, I also say, I want to be very clear about this. These soft power tools are not, they shouldn't be championed by the left wing or right wing. These soft power tools can be used against any international mischief, whether it's a type of mischief that is championed by people on the left or the right. Human rights, for example. Human rights, this soft power tools, economic sanction, the list-making approach. We can effectively bring American and Western bankers into the human rights campaigns if we tell them what they should be suspicious about. Okay, human rights and counterterrorism go hand in hand. Okay, you wouldn't know that now. There's going to be a great melding of that, I predict. I wrote an article this week called "Coming to a Law School Near You," the melding of the merger of human rights and counterterrorism. It's going to happen because people are using the same tools in the same way to go after different types of villains. Okay, here's a little test. Okay, I'm going to put up two statements, and I've veiled these statements a little bit so you can't tell what they're talking about, whether it's terrorism or human rights violations. Okay, this is the first statement. Here's how I would explain it to a jury, all this legal mumbo-jumbo. This is a blank factory, human rights violation or terrorism. Let's call it blank. Of those smokestacks are spewing out hatred and mischief. So who's liable if you've lost a loved one to blank ink? It's the bank that loaned the money. It's the architect who designed the factory, knowing it was going to be spewing out hatred. It's the suppliers who supplied the factory with ingredients to manufacture blank acts. They're all responsible, each and every one. That's the law of the United States. So this is a private lawsuit. Okay, that's statement number one. Okay, statement number two. International law clearly prohibits, this is a typo, clearly provides that corporations can be held accountable for international mischief. Blank, a young American killed abroad because blank purposely turns a blind eye as to how their products are used, must have access to justice. Okay, one of these is a classic left-wing case. One of these is a classic right-wing case. To me, these statements are almost identical, are they not? Very similar. What do you think? Is this terrorism or human rights? What do you think? Wouldn't know. Wouldn't know. This could be either. Okay, this is a statement by Ron Motley, the lead attorney in the 9/11 lawsuit. The blank is Al-Qaeda Inc., and he's talking about jihad. Blank, the other blank is jihad and hatred. Okay, so this would be a classic right-wing case, right? Now this was a statement made by Jennifer Green of the Center for Constitutional Rights. She was the lead attorney in a case involving the sale by Caterpillar Inc. of bulldozers to the Israeli military. Rachel Corrie, who was her client. Okay, Rachel Corrie was an American killed by an Israeli bulldozer. This is a human rights lawsuit. Okay? Jennifer Green and Ron Motley are saying basically the same thing. They would probably be shocked to know that. Okay? This is what I'm saying, if I'm not being subtle enough. Okay? Human rights and counterterrorism should go hand in hand. They are both, they're two sides of the same coin. And so I hope that makes sense. This was sort of late notice. I kind of took away from some of the remarks I was going to have in the subsequent panel. And I think we have some time for questions if anybody has them. Yes, Ross.
Do I need a microphone? I'll be coming.
Okay.
Can you hum a few bars?
No, you don't want me to do that.
Because I don't want anybody to miss my question.
Okay, here you go.
Jeff, I was just hoping you could distinguish between German anti-Nazi laws, which prohibit the use of speech, certain kinds of speech, particularly if it's directed against Jews or if it recalls the Nazi era,
Yeah.
versus the Islamic view that the West should not be making light of their religion.
Yeah, it's a very. I'm not sure I can because I must say I'm.
I don't think you can.
Yeah, I think I tend to be an absolutist, more of an absolutist on First Amendment issues. I have a hard time conceiving of a situation where the United States, where I practice, could ever get away with doing something like that. Our closest ally, Great Britain, has a law, for example, that allows them to prosecute somebody for wearing insignia that is supportive of proscribed terrorist organizations. They don't have a constitution like we do. But my attitude is very much a traditionalist when it comes, or an absolutist when it comes to the First Amendment, and I would say that the remedy for people who deny the Holocaust is to hold them up to ridicule and to name and shame them. And fortunately, that's how we've dealt with the problem. I would not be a big fan of trying to import some of the European free expression provisions into our system. Yes, sir.
I used to play rock and roll. Okay, I was the leader of a band, so I support the First Amendment and freedom of expression all the way down the line.
Mm-hmm.
But I have heard that there were people of Arabic descent who were asked to leave this country merely because they were expressing their opinions about the United States or Israel or whatever that they like. I mean, is it really right to limit freedom of expression if it is the First Amendment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure I buy the premise that they were asked to leave because of their political expression, but the immigration remedies are such that we, for example, we have a long tradition of asking people as the condition of their visa or them getting citizenship, have you ever been a Nazi? Have you ever been a communist? That we have these old Cold War era questions, and we have convicted people for naturalization fraud for failing to answer accurately whether or not they've been a member of an organization that advocates the persecution of others on the basis of their race or religion. And those are Islamic cases. Those are some prominent religious leaders, Islamic religious leaders. And so I think that I'm not sure that the expedient way that you've described it is necessarily how we've done it, although it's no secret that the United States government has arrested people who were out of status after 9/11. The closest thing I can think of to what you're describing is the ongoing litigation between Tariq Ramadan, who's a very prominent and in some circles very well-respected Islamic leader in Switzerland, who's trying to come to Notre Dame. I must say I'm sanguine about him coming because I think it would be kind of fun. I don't think that he would have the same kind of reception within the United States as he tends to get in Europe because, for better or worse, we know how to handle religious extremism in ways that I don't think our European allies do, just because we're more of a religious society. That said, I have a hard time conjuring I don't think that the right to associate with Tariq Ramadan is as a challenge to his denial of his visa is a First Amendment protected. I have a hard time conjuring the First Amendment right at issue among the people who would like to associate with him. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it. Okay. Yeah, another?
Actually, we have a question from the overflow room.
Sure.
That question is, can you define international mischief?
Oh, international, yeah, that's nothing, that's just my own creation. Anything that we identify as something we want to prevent. It could be global warming. I mean, the way I've learned human rights law is basically that what drives any country's foreign policy is in approximate order of importance: security, number one; economic interest, number two; and the larger other category. Other can mean anything. It could mean human rights. It could mean terrorism. It could mean global warming. It could be money laundering. And one of the things that as I travel around academic conferences, one of the things I'm very happy with is there's a lot of recognition that human rights as a driver of foreign policy there's an acceptance that at least human rights has never been minimized as an important other interest by this administration. And a lot of liberals have said that. So what happens is that once the exigency of security gets taken away, human rights is probably better today in terms of our acceptance of it as a U.S. foreign policy driver than it has ever been, including during the Carter years when human rights was a fairly newfangled, and it just started being recognized as a factor in human rights. So what that means is that we can actually, I think it's very nice because it sort of gives us it gives us an explanation for why we care about the fate of people who have never set foot here. I mean, I think that is the essence of international human rights, is that we're not just being busybodies when we care about adulterers getting stoned in parts of the world or gays being executed. We care about those people even if they have no connection to our country. That's what international human rights is. Yes?
You cleared it up. No, my question had to do with the connection. My question would have been, what you presented was a concept of joint and several liability. Kind of.
Sort of. Yeah,
Joint and several liability, which could be absolutist, which could be expansive. It just depends on how it's applied. But so then my question was, well, what's the so what?
Yeah.
You cleared it up.
Okay.
But one of the things you might be able to add to that continuum, which isn't there, and which is a tactic or a strategy in itself, is conflict and dispute resolution.
Yeah, I agree. That's an excellent, and that's one that Americans did not invent that. That's something that I think is worthy of placing on there. And one of the values of describing it like a continuum for me is it gives reality to how the world actually works. And there's a big misnomer when you talk to conspiracy theorists. They tend to think that the U.S. government acts with one brain. And there is such a thing as a commander-in-chief, but if anybody who's worked for the U.S. government knows, and I know there are plenty of people in this room who fit in that category, they know that there's a whole series of nerve centers that give signals to the ultimate operational decision maker, and it's really it's an open competition among them. And that's true of the various multi-tool arsenal we have in terrorism, in counterterrorism. It's that there's a good-natured turf battles over the right to do what you do against a certain challenge that emerges. The classic one was in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 when the U.S. military started getting into the criminal prosecution business. And there were some very, very pitched battles between justice lawyers and DOD lawyers saying, we have an American citizen here. Should that person become an enemy combatant, or should we treat him or her in the criminal justice system? I don't need to tell you what side I was on. But that's an example where both sides are competing for the right to do what they do. There was a question over here. Yes, Nina.
My question relates to your theory about the convergence of human rights violations and terrorism. And in the context of sort of, I guess you can call them civil wars or internal, disputes that are significant and widespread within countries, where you have large segments of a civilian population being subject to, as a tool by the combatants, subjected to horrible human rights violations. Would you say that's the convergence? Would you say that's human rights violations? Some of it, it is.
Yeah. Well,
I
think about this. In the last several months, I've been very interested in the human rights implications of terrorist financing, because terrorist financing I know, and putting it into a sort of human rights template is not something I know. I've had a hard time coming up with what the individual human right is when it comes to judging the human rights implications of our terrorist financing regime. Some people argue that it's the right to personal property, but there are plenty of states that don't even recognize personal property as a phenomenon. What do we do with them? I think the person who's answered that question best for me was I think Sue last week at a different academic conference, where maybe the individual human right at issue is the right to not have your property taken away from without an effective remedy to contest it. Sort of a procedural due process. I would have no problem saying that should be exported as a multilateral standard. I say that as somewhat of a unilateralist because we happen to believe that, and I understand that's one of the fallacies of my argument. But no, I think absolutely. I think what you find is individual human rights are driven by a non-negotiable set of things that organized countries, states that control territory, cannot do to their own people. That to me is how I define it. That means suddenly our problem is not merely radical Islam, elements of Islam that wants to kill us, but arguably elements of Islam that impose impose human rights, that are guilty of human rights violations by operation of the Sharia law. I don't think there's enough secular humanists saying what's negotiable these days. They're oddly silent. I think they're the logical people to be very outspoken about what's happening to people like them in these parts of the world, and that's really what I hope. I hope that I can flesh them out. Other questions? Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Tell us what the National Security Law International Assessment and Strategy Center is, of which you are the director. Are you
it's
an NGO? Are you government?
It's an NGO. It's a 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit, and it's established in Washington. It's basically a group of academics, scholars. We do have government contracts, but I'm on the charity side. So I'm a employee of the nonprofit side of IASC. But yeah, we're public. We're publicly documents about us is available. So I'm not speaking for the U.S. government when I talk. My views might be informed by my experience, but I wanted to be clear on that. Yes.
This will have to be the last.
Okay. Last question.
I just had a comment on the continuum that you showed based on the uses of hard and soft power.
Yeah.
In my studies of international relations and national security, I always had the impression that hard and soft power were much more of a paired type, and not so much on a continuum in a linear fashion. I had always the opinion that force and statecraft were two paired objects that were necessary and reliant on the other. That's right.
I completely agree with that. This continuum is supposed to describe the multi-tool arsenal that either states that have military or multilateral organizations have. And so the trick is to find the combination of tools that are most effective to deal with a certain problem. And because most people here are lawyers, that's why we're at a law school. We understand the soft power stuff, but it has to be effective, ideally, done in tandem with other tools. So it's not an either-or proposition.
Well, I mean, obviously, because in order for your soft power to come about, it had to have been hard power that brought it about in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, soft power is only good as the ability to back it up. That's the argument. That's the geopolitical strategy argument.
And then my question, I guess, was that multiple times you'd mentioned art being the softest power of the soft powers, and I guess I was just confused or not quite sure as to what you meant by its use of power and how it was actually a form of soft power.
I put that in there because in terms of what I started to say about rock and roll, if you think about what the latest controversies are over artistic expression, meaning the Danish cartoons, I think here, if we're treating art, it would be off the chart. It would be softer than diplomacy. And the question I pose is, if even art is too harsh because of the perception problem, what are we left with? I mean, do we really owe them an apology for having depicted them in a way? Those who, and now I must say that I have fellow writers on the Counterterrorism blog where I write a lot, who have said we owe the Muslim world an apology for having. I happen not to agree with them. I think that when you start dealing with perceptions, that's when we really get in trouble in terms of trying to assess the impact on our policies. If you throw perceptions in there, and it sort of throws off the equation.
So then it's to say, I guess, that it's like a sort of subconscious form of soft power that uses its expression to
Yes.
change
Yeah.
the opinions of others?
Yeah, I mean, I think art historically has played that role. I asked the curator last night of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame if he's ever thought about doing an exhibit on the role of rock and roll in bringing communism down. And he says, no, that's a great idea. And we started talking about this, and there was no question that if you live in the Czech Republic, rock and roll is what kept you. They have a different impression of some of our rock and roll artists than we do, because they were relevant to what was going on in their country back in both '68 and then years later in the Velvet Revolution.
Jeff, I'm going to interrupt. Actually, I forget was the president or the prime minister of Hungary a number of years ago actually hosted an event at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame thanking rock and roll for bringing communism down in Hungary. So that actually did happen.
Yeah. So I think. I mean, my point is that things. If we keep things in place, rock and roll would not have been what we have right now.
Right.
Yeah.
At the same time, what rock and roll may have contributed to the fall of communism couldn't have taken place without the other.
That's right. Absolutely. I completely agree. Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.